That check that Madison talked about, putting one interest against the other, seems in our era to have the Supreme Court has overridden it.
I think in many cases it has. Now, the way things work in America, usually things have to build up to a certain point, and then the counterbalancing considerations come in. I don't know what it'll be. It may be dramatic revisions in the kind of people who are nominated for the court. It may be legislature, the Congress stands up and does some serious work at delimiting jurisdiction for the court, which is allowed to do. But something will happen because there's an imbalance right now.
And the people who ultimately are the source of power understand that, I think.
They do understand it, and they're deeply bothered by it. They're also deeply respectful of the court. Americans love the court. They love the idea of the court. They love the idea of justice, of the idea of equal justice under law. But they also have a sense that there's been a violation of their sensibilities and their principles here from time to time in court decisions.
And when you look at the timeline when you look at the progress in American history, you mentioned Martin Luther King. Civil War is resolved. We have the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, and we have the 14th Amendment, which says the states have to recognize the equal rights of all citizens. Yet it's 100 years in the United States of America, or almost 100 years from there till Martin Luther King getting thrown in the Birmingham jail.
Customs and practices die slowly, and the natural instinct of groups of people, factions, Madison's term, tribes, sociologists or anthropologists would call it, to live together and cooperatively and harmoniously. This is not a natural feature of mankind. You know, again, the founders read Hobbes. Hobbes said life in a state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, a war of all against all. And for the American experiment to succeed, there was a lot in human nature itself that had to be overcome. They talk about faction, the founders. They also talk about the kind of government that we have presupposes the existence of virtue and the capacity to do the right thing in a way no other form of government has. This is part of the reason of the fragility of this kind of government. You know, Madison and Adams discuss how long this kind of government can last. They're hopeful that this republic will last forever, but their actual rugged estimate is that it might last 75 or 100 years, you know, because it's so full of expectation, it is so ambitious, it's never been done before this way.
Thankfully they were wrong about that, and the experiment continues. You write about what Martin Luther King actually wrote, Jr. wrote in the Birmingham jail, which was what?
Well, he wrote a lot of things, but what I take away from it, I think, is most important. It was respect for the founding institutions. First of all, he didn't think America could be reformed by bringing in, you know, foreign courts, the decisions of European courts or Asian courts, but by going back to our fundamental principles. And then the other thing he reinforced was the idea of higher law, the notion that there is a higher law, that there are natural rights and there are human rights, that the Constitution, the Declaration, part embody this, and that we disobey a particular law that we think is unjust, but in doing it, disobey it lawfully and accept the consequences of punishment. This was a singular departure from a lot of what was being said at the time. Burn it down, burn baby burn, and so on.
And here's where I find sort of a pivot point in the cultural war in our country. I mean, you have the founders, Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder, articulating this principle, realizing slavery is wrong. You have Frederick Douglass harkening back to the founding principles, said this is what we have to stand for, this is what we have to believe. You come all the way forward to 1963, you have Martin Luther King challenging Americans to redeem the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution, saying this is what he believes in. But it seems to me that since then, the left in America, liberals in America, have completely rejected that principle. They are no longer arguing that their vision of justice, that what they want to see happen in America, can be rooted in that principle that we have rights that come from God.
Yeah, now they're taking a new departure point. It's hard to know what the basis of this departure point is. I don't know what it is. But all I can tell you is that if we depart from these rock-solid principles, we do so at our peril.
Well, let me suggest a parallel. If John C. Calhoun, committed to the slave system of the South of his time, looks at the Declaration of Independence and says, you know, I can't justify slaveholding by the Declaration of Independence. So rather than give up slavery, I'm going to give up the Declaration of Independence. He then became an enemy and an attacker of the fundamental underlying principle of our republic. Might there not be a similar phenomenon taking place today? where if what you want to do is say there's a right to kill an unborn child, or what you want to do is say that there is a right to same-sex marriage, that it would be difficult to justify those rights the way that Jefferson and Adams and Franklin justified the rights of men in the Declaration of Independence. Therefore, if you want to create a cultural order where those things are the norm, like Calhoun rejecting the Declaration for slavery, you have to reject the Declaration for abortion.
Well, one wonders where one goes for one's justification. See, I have said that the great debates of American policy over the next few years into the foreseeable future will be about patriotism, not about whether you support particularly this war or not, Iraq or wherever else, but about the meaning of the patria, of the country, and what is its meaning. And I think what you're going to see is not, what they call strict constructionists or the evolutionists, but people who fundamentally believe in the goodness of the American regime and the soundness of its founding principles, and people who think there is some alternative justification available. I don't know what it is. I don't know where the appeal is, but you see this as you get into these deeply rancorous debates about things like abortion, gay marriage, and the like. But our mutual friend Gary Bauer, I think, got it very well when he was saying, do we believe the Declaration's, at the heart of the founding? Yes. Do we believe it's a fundamental statement of our principles? Yes. Can we teach it in the public schools? Well, maybe not, because it says all men are created equal. What are we supposed to do when the kids say, what do you mean created equal?
Who's the creator?
Right, who's the creator? Oh goodness, children, we shouldn't go there. So this puts the problem very square.
But now you have a project to try and ensure that this understanding of where we come from as a people is in fact taught in our schools.
Well, think of the founders, think of Lincoln, and then think of Reagan, my president, my boss. I had 2 jobs with Ronald Reagan. His last speech, Terry, was about the teaching of American history, and his farewell address, a large part of it, is about how kids, if they're not being taught their history, he says, very subversive moment for Ronald Reagan. He said, if your parents and teachers aren't teaching you American history, you rebel. You tell them you want to learn it. It's very funny. But he's right, because you remain alien to yourself in a culture and a country in which you do not know your past. It is critical that we recover a sense of what this country is and about. A, because people are going to live here, they should know where they're living. B, the future is coming, we have to shape it in accordance with those principles. C, it is still the last best hope of Earth. I mean, this country and its institutions remains the most hopeful set of human relations the world has ever seen.
One of the great things about President Reagan, I think, is he actually taught Americans these principles through his presidency. And you talk about Ronald Reagan going to the Berlin Wall and insisting on saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Wasn't it true that Ronald Reagan actually, to the American people, presented the Cold War as a struggle between this vision, this moral, godly vision of man, and a godless, amoral vision of man? And it did 2 things. That it enraged the left in America when he did it, and it worked.
Yes, all things are true. I was thinking of a conversation I had recently with Nathan Sharansky, who was a famous Soviet dissident mathematician, disciple of Sakharov's, who was in the Gulag and reading the Bible, which he called, with another prisoner, which he called the Reagan Studies. When I told you this, you said, oh, they can read the Bible in the Gulag, just not in American public schools, right? But
the ACLU can sue him.
That's right. Reading it, and when Ronald Reagan talked about the evil empire, and when Ronald Reagan talked about tearing down the wall, this thrilled the hearts of people everywhere. Yes, it was a clear moral vision that Ronald Reagan had. He said it without embarrassment, without hesitation. The American people rallied to it, but what maybe is just as interesting, people around the world rallied to it. One of my favorite Reagan stories is that story he tells about the Navy guys in the South China Sea, and there's a little boat, and it's filled with some boat people, and they're yelling at the Navy guys. The Navy guys can't hear, and they get closer and closer. It's this guy in the boats, the refugee from Indochina, and he's waving, and he says, hello, sailor, hello, Navy, hello, freedom, man.
Yeah.
Freedom, man.
Yeah, another interesting element, I think, of Reagan saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and the whole way he approached the Soviet Union. And it also plays into solidarity in Poland, Roman Catholic, nonviolent resistance movement, that Reagan was appealing to the sense of right, residual sense of right and wrong in Mikhail Gorbachev and Soviet leaders that he believed was there. The same way, in a sense, that Martin Luther King was appealing to Americans to get rid of segregation.
Absolutely. It's a reminder. Remember who you are. Remember what you stand for. You remember under what banner you were born. You know, people ask me, what conversation would you like to have been most in on that you weren't? That's a great question. The conversation I would have liked to have been in on was the one between Ronald Reagan and the Pope. The one with Pope John Paul, where they closed the doors, got rid of all the aides, and talked for an hour and a half. What do you suppose they were talking about?
Yeah, I believe that the sort of appeal Reagan made there might not have worked with other kinds of leaders, like a Hitler, or maybe an Ayatollah.
That's right.
But it did work then, and that, I think, was a testimony to Reagan's judgment as a sense of time and place.
Well, if you take, what's the common denominator of Reagan and Thatcher and John Paul? This was a very moral universe these people live in.
Bill Bennett, greatly appreciate having you on Online with Terry Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you.